Share via email. Report story. By Wing Song Halo. Feel the love. The shrill screech of their opponent, a lunatic who called herself Aphrodite, rang through the air, giving only a moment's notice before one of her arrows zipped by. It only narrowly missed Deku's ear as he moved out of the way. Careful. Deku. Uravity's voice came over Deku's earpiece, crackling slightly. I think I saw where her arrow hit. It totally busted up a fire hydrant over here. I'm fine, but I can't get close with her firing arrows everywhere, even with Black Whip, he replied. Uraraka was supposed to be his partner on this particular job as provisional heroes, but Aphrodite had made a building collapse between them before they could even work out a strategy, separating them. They'd decided to make their way around both sides of their opponent in a horseshoe formation and corner her from behind. No problem, his friend said confidently. I'll slow her down. Only 3 more seconds had gone by before Deku heard Aphrodite yell in alarm. Uravity had evidently used the destruction from earlier to make impromptu projectiles as a distraction, and they were plummeting down around the fuchsia-haired woman they were pursuing. No, not yet, she protested, a desperate edge to her voice, as Deku closed in on her. One for all crackled through all his limbs and sparked in his peripheral vision as he sprang closer in powerful bounds, like a superpowered rabbit. I haven't spread enough love yet. We'd love if you came quietly. He fired back, but his attempt at a one-liner must not have been very pleasing, because Aphrodite growled at him and drew back on her massive bow, quickly aiming and letting her arrow fly. Deku let out an unheroic squeak and ducked, but he needn't have bothered, because their foe had been aiming above him anyway. She was trying to repeat her little building collapse trick, this time with the intention of crushing him under the wreckage. Why did they always have to wreck buildings? What were those arrows made of, anyway? Oh no you don't, Uravity's voice echoed, both right next to his ear and a few yards away. Deku caught a glimpse of her, leaping into the air and touching the chunks of heavy stone one after another before they could slam down around him. The concrete now hovered in the air like a small, industrial asteroid belt. This would be a lot easier if you had just let me hit you, the villainess snarled. Much less destruction. No thanks. Deku lunged up with float, using Uravity's new concrete asteroids to propel himself even closer and letting Black Whip's dark tendrils spiral down his right arm to strengthen it. While it was true that Aphrodite's quirk, Cupid's arrow, did not harm people physically if they were struck, it was nevertheless much more dangerous than if it hit inanimate objects. She was within reach now, but Aphrodite's violet eyes narrowed in defiance anyway, and this time when she drew her bow, she aimed right for Deku, who was barreling towards her from above. Watch out! Uravity's panicked warning was hardly necessary, as Deku's arms shot down to cover the last bit of distance separating him from Aphrodite, quick as lightning. But as Deku's gloved hands closed around the woman's arm, the arrow torpedoed right at his face. With the split second of time he had to react, Deku sucked in a breath and bent backward, his spine curving to let the glowing pink projectile whiz over his head, mere millimeters from the side of his nose. The black feathers that made up the fletching grazed his cheek, slicing against his skin, but still he held fast to his quarry as he used the backward momentum to swing her over his head. He spotted Uravity at a short distance in the instant he was upside down, her eyes wide with fascination as he rolled into a backflip, swinging himself up in midair and at last slamming Aphrodite down into the ground. His armored knees pressed into her shoulder blades, her arms still twisted behind her in his grip. Promoted stories. You'll also like. Hurt 'cause I love you to death Izuocha. Ha. 8.6K 141 Class 1A is now Class 2A and is working to be better heroes due to events that had happened before. Deku has gotten strong feelings toward Uraraka during the summer as finished. 8.3k 508 tilde. He save all of them just a smile plastered on his face before disappearing through the wind. Izuku's Harem Academia 185k 1.7 Qst. Read. The Kings and Queen Yandere Wakfu X Reader 56.4k 1.8 Kyonder. Wakfu X Reader. Images do not belong to me unless stated. Wakfu does not belong to me, it belongs to Enigma. This is being rewritten in another book on my profile. Her prince from the underworld, half demon is. 0.25.7k 450. It's basically the same story as my succubus Momo X Deku story. I know, real original, but hey, now you guys get a Deku from the other side of the tracks. Mirko X Shy Male Reader 168k 1.1 Key. Don't own MHA. I hope you enjoy the story I made. The hero who sings with a smile 38.5k 364 high. Guys, this is my first story I write on Wattpad. I hope you like it. Get off me, she screeched, wriggling under him powerlessly. Deku had done his best not to make too big a crater in the sidewalk this time, but cracks were still spread around them like a giant spider web. Let me up. That wouldn't be the greatest idea for us right now, Uravity remarked, emerging out of the settling dust and touching her fingertips together to make the chunks of concrete crash down a safe distance from the three of them. Wait, she added as she drew closer, putting her hands on her hips. I've been saving this one. Sometimes, love hurts. Nice, said Deku with an appreciative nod. Uravity was much better at one-liners. It was only a few minutes later that the police arrived to take the villainess into custody, her hateful glare and vows of revenge being cut short as Sansa pushed her head down to get her into the police car. You okay? Izuku's friend sounded concerned as she walked closer to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. With her helmet off and held under her free arm, she was Uraraka again, a bubbly, sweet girl with a sunny smile and rosy cheeks. He furrowed his eyebrows at her slightly, confused. Of course I am, he said. Why do you ask? He hadn't even been hit once. After all, Uraraka raised a hand to his face in answer, and Izuku's eyes widened, his breath catching as her thumb gently brushed a horizontal stripe on his cheek that he had forgotten was still stinging. You're bleeding, she informed him, voice tender as her eyes searched him. Oh, that. Izuku's response had been a bit squeakier than he intended, so he cleared his throat, mentally telling himself to get a grip as Uraraka's hand fell to her side again. It's no big deal. The feathers on one of the arrows grazed me, but, he shrugged. If he'd actually been hit by Cupid's arrow, he would have been immobilized with an all-consuming infatuation for whatever or whoever he laid eyes on next, and as he was not currently pining after the maniac being carted off in the police car, he figured he'd manage to avoid the quirk's effects. I guess it would have had to be the arrowhead that hit me, for the quirk to work on me. A thought suddenly occurring to him, he looked around. Hey, where did that arrow go, anyway? Uraraka smiled wryly, gesturing over her shoulder at a fallen heap of metal that had once been another fire hydrant, a tall geyser of water gushing from its small form like a high-pressure artery. Izuku looked down at his boots, which were rapidly overtaken by the seeping puddle from across the street. Ah, he said, feeling a bit guilty that there were now two broken fire hydrants as a result of this battle. Oops, Shoto will freeze it before it causes too much damage, just like last time this happened, Uraraka dismissed with a one-shoulder shrug. The important thing is that we caught the bad guy and there were no injuries since we evacuated the whole block. Well, he couldn't argue with that. Yes, I suppose you're right. He held out a fist. In that case, good work today. Uraraka grinned, tapping her fist against his. Well done, partner, she replied, eyes sparkling. He couldn't help but respond with an equally bright smile, something warm and light fluttering in his stomach. Dash 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 dot. Being a provisional hero was strange, because one day you'd be working a job just like any adult, and the next day you'd be kicking yourself for taking too long doling out justice because you hadn't gotten to study for your English test. Izuku felt torn between two worlds, both with high expectations from him, and it was hard to prioritize when everything felt equally important. And when there was his hero life and his student life to balance, how was he supposed to even think of anything else? His peers had gone from classmates to friends to practically coworkers, and he couldn't help but feel so wrapped up in all his responsibilities that relaxing seemed like something from a different lifetime. Something on your mind. Izuku's head whipped around to see Uraraka approaching. Her casual clothes were baggier than they needed to be, hanging off her small frame in a way that was as impractical as it was endearing, and her hair was wrestled into a bun on top of her head. He let out a sigh, scooting over to allow her room to sit on the other end of the couch he was parked on. I feel like I'm forgetting how to cut loose, he grumbled, smacking the pencil held between his fingers against the notebook in his lap. I mean, when was the last time we just hung out for no reason? Was there ever a time? She rested her elbows on her knees and tilted her head in thought. There was a strand of hair that had escaped from her bun, tumbling down beside her cheek. Izuku shoved down the fleeting desire to tuck it behind her ear. I can't remember either, she admitted. It must be ancient history by now. Izuku groaned and let his head fall back against the top of the couch. History. We have a test coming up in that too, don't we? Tests were easy for Izuku. He ate tests for breakfast. Tests took one look at Izuku and went home crying to their mommies. But they took up so much time, time he could be using for actually improving himself as a hero, or reading ahead on their class material, or I can hear you thinking, Uraraka teased. How about you try just not thinking? Not thinking, he echoed quizzically, lifting his head to look at her. Except when he looked, she was much closer than she'd been a moment ago. Izuku's heart stuttered, caught off guard. Whoa, wasn't expecting you to, haha. He trailed off awkwardly as Uraraka closed in on him, inching over until her arm brushed his. You're awfully close, he gulped. Deku, aren't you tired of over-analyzing everything? She lifted her eyes to lock onto his, chocolate brown glittering under dark lashes, and a small smile curved one corner of her mouth. Some things should just be, shouldn't they? And what kind of things would that be? His voice was strangled and weak, like he'd been kicked in the gut, as Uraraka placed a hand on his knee and twisted in her seat to push herself even closer. Izuku's eyes darted around the room frantically. Hey, can't you even look at me? There was something light, almost softly amused, in her voice that Izuku had never heard before, and his mouth fell open to stammer a response, but nothing came out. His heart was pounding so fast it was starting to hurt, and his stomach had leapt somewhere into the vicinity of his throat. I'm right here, she said, Izuku. The shock of hearing his given name finally brought his eyes to hers. WH. What? He breathed. Her other hand came up to press against his surging heart. Her eyes were dark, but still dancing with humor. Her warm breath was mere centimeters away from his face. Don't think, she advised him in a whisper. Just feel. He gulped again, his panic rising as the distance between them slowly disappeared. What on earth was happening? And why all of a sudden? Why at all? His brain swirled dizzyingly, a million thoughts crowding against one another in a frenzy. Until, quite suddenly, they stilled. His eyes fell closed, and Izuku stopped thinking and felt. Izuku woke, quite unexpectedly, to the sound of thunder rumbling outside. His eyes snapped open as his dorm room window rattled with the force of it, and he blinked rapidly in the dark, watching the ceiling stop spinning above him as he was jolted into consciousness. His hand came up to cover his mouth, still feeling vestiges of illusory warmth there. What the hell had that been about? Some kind of stress dream that turned into a nightmare. Except it hadn't been scary in the way that nightmares usually were, had it? Sitting up and running a hand through his hair, Izuku tried to make sense of everything his awful subconscious had just conjured up. He had been feeling anxious about his hero work and schoolwork, lamenting that he never spent time with friends anymore, and then Uraraka. His cheeks blazed with heat, and he dropped his head into his hands. How could his brain cast his closest friend in such a role? Sure, Uraraka was pretty, and fun to be around, and she probably cared about him more than any of his other classmates, and he might also care about her the most, but she was his friend. They'd never had any interaction like that before. Hold on, the rational part of him urged. Dreams were just a manifestation of concerns not properly addressed in wakefulness, weren't they? Just your brain assembling information into silly, random little stories. Uraraka was probably representative of his desire for closeness with his friends, right? Right. A bright flash of lightning illuminated his whole room at that moment, followed by another deafening roll of thunder. It was as if nature was grumbling at him about how stupid that conclusion was in telling him to see the light already. Stubbornly, Izuku screwed his eyes shut, falling back against his pillow and resolving to go back to sleep and have perfectly sensible dreams. Thank you. He didn't fall asleep for another hour at least. By the time morning arrived, Izuku felt exhausted. Not only had the thunder kept startling him awake, and the rainy weather made his repeatedly injured and healed joints ache, but he'd had two more dreams that were almost identical to the first. They all ended the same way. Don't think, just feel. Izuku whimpered and scrubbed his hands over his face as he waited for his class to start. Whoa, said the voice he'd been hearing all night. You look terrible, Deku. He looked up at Uraraka and raised his eyebrows. Thank you. You look very nice today too, he deadpanned. She giggled, clasping her hands behind her back. Her eyes were sparkling just as they had last night. No, but they hadn't actually. That was just his stupid subconscious. Sorry. I just meant you seem super tired. What happened? Did the storm keep you up? Among other things, he grumbled under his breath, because it wasn't like he could say no. You did, actually. Taking a second glance at her, he frowned a little. Actually, you look a little tired yourself, he noted. Her rosy cheeks darkened a little as she rubbed the back of her head. Maybe it was his tired eyes blurring his vision, but she kind of looked like she was glowing under the fluorescent lights. I'm not good with storms, she admitted, and I also had this crazy dream. He froze. Dream. Yeah, she shrugged. I dreamed that the villain from yesterday hit me with her arrow and I fell in love with a post box, which kept scolding me for not writing my parents more often. Izuku stared. It was weird, she concluded. Why was it that even though what she had said was absolutely ridiculous, his stomach was still fluttering like he was using float? Yeah, sounds it. Anyway, Uraraka went on. I guess we're lucky neither of us got hit yesterday, or I might have actually fallen in love with a post box. Do I even want to know what in the world you're talking about? Zero quipped as he took his seat at the desk next to Izuku. Hero work stuff. Uraraka explained, waving her hand dismissively. Don't think about it too hard. Don't think. Just feel. Izuku's face heated up as he recalled her words from the dream for the millionth time. Who left Deku out in the sun too long? Growled Kachan, throwing his bag onto the desk in front of Izuku before dropping into his own seat. You look like a goddamn baboon's ass. Everyone's being so nice to me today, Izuku remarked flatly. Uraraka hid her laugh behind her hand. You look fine. Don't worry. We're just giving you a hard time 'cause we care. She reached out a hand, and for one wild moment Izuku had no idea what was happening until she smoothed a few particularly wild tufts of his hair. Izuku remained perfectly still, his eyes wide as saucers, but after only a moment she was pulling away. There, she said, popping her hands on her hips like she hadn't just made Izuku's brain stop working. Now your hair looks the same as always. A little of the bravado drained out of her as her eyes examined the mess atop Izuku's head. Quote dot dot dot. Well, almost, anyway. He flapped his jaw a few times, but couldn't get out any words in response, even as the bell rang and everyone scrambled to take their seats for class. Dash 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 dot. As the day wore on, Izuku found his gaze returning to Uraraka again and again. Which was really inconvenient, considering she sat on the other side of the room from him and towards the back. Once, mortifyingly, she'd actually caught him looking, and had straightened up in her seat, giving him an uncertain wave and smile that was absolutely adorable. Wait, no, it was not adorable. Well, okay, it was. But in a friendly way. Damn it, why did he have to dream something so embarrassing while Uraraka just got a ridiculous post-box dream? It was only after the fourth time his eyes wandered to her that a thought struck him. I dreamed that the villain from yesterday hit me with her arrow. And I fell in love, hit me with her arrow. His pencil point, which he'd been pressing too heavily into his paper, shattered with a snap. That moment, when he was in midair, his hold tightening on Aphrodite, for an instant, his gaze had locked with. You're bleeding, Uraraka had said as she touched the spot the arrow's feathers had grazed him. Oh no, maybe they hadn't been so lucky after all. The rest of class was awkward. How could he even look at her now, knowing what he knew? These sensations he'd been feeling, so confusing and yet so exhilarating. They were artificial, unnatural. He realized that now it all made sense. So why? Why was he still so tempted to be close to her, see where these feelings would lead him? It wasn't fair to her. She hadn't asked for this. Neither had he, for that matter, but if he was going to be forced to fall in love with someone, Uraraka probably would have been his first choice. At least she was unlikely to throttle him if she found out. And though the intensity was new, it wasn't like he was unfamiliar with wanting to be near her, wanting to see her smile, wanting to feel her touch gentle and soft on his cheek. Nope, nope, wait, that one was unfamiliar. Wasn't it? Deku. Her voice forced him to look up, and he startled a bit, because she was leaning down towards him, much closer than he'd been expecting. Ah, he squeaked. You Uraraka. What's up? It's lunchtime, she informed him with a raised eyebrow. What's up with you? I could practically hear you thinking. He swallowed thickly, Dream Uraraka's words bouncing between his ears again. I was just. Hey wait. She mercifully cut him off, her eyes dropping to the notebook under Izuku's hands. Is that me? Were you sketching me? Izuku looked down, and bit back a yelp. A detailed but very incomplete sketch of Uraraka was indeed softly etched onto his notebook paper. Her eyes were crinkled at the corners as she smiled widely, warmly, the way she had when she'd called him partner. Uh, no. I mean, why yeah, it does look like you, but it's really good, she said seriously, and somehow she had managed to swipe the notebook off his desk without his noticing. Her gaze moved over the paper in amazement. Can I look through some of your other sketches? Izuku didn't know why she asked, as she was already flipping through the pages. No, he said weakly anyway. Oh, there's a few of Mina, and here's one of Kirishima, she remarked. Although these look more like costume notes. She held the book sideways, tilting her head to match. I'm always observing everyone, he defended himself, taking hold of his notebook. Uraraka let him pull it away, though she looked somewhat reluctant. You made me look pretty. There was something wistful in her tone. Izuku had flipped the notebook closed, but still her eyes moved over it, as if she could still see what was hidden within. You were pretty, he responded without thinking, and then clamped his mouth shut, his face probably going baboon-ass red again. For a moment, she stared at him, chocolate brown gazing directly into emerald, cheeks darkening to match his, mouth slightly open in surprise. And then the eternal instant was over. You flatterer. You're too nice to me. Uraraka laughed as she smacked his shoulder. Ow, Izuku protested, though it had really hurt more on the inside. Anyway, do you want to eat lunch together? We can go outside. Her voice was bright, as if everything between them was totally normal, as if Izuku could have dreams about her and draw her on his notes and she wouldn't even care. The thought made something twist in his belly. Did he want her to care? He opened his mouth to answer her. As if to reflect Izuku's sudden new melancholy mood, the windows rattled as thunder boomed outside. Somehow, without their notice, the storm had blotted out the sky again, turning everything dreary and gray. Rain pelted against the glass, making rivulets that raced downward like tiny streams. I guess the rainy season says no to that plan, Uraraka said with a wry smile. But we could still eat together. What do you think? Don't think. He couldn't stop hearing it in the back of his mind. Just feel. But what if he was never intended to feel these things? I need to go, he blurted, rising from his seat in a rush and ducking around her, making a dash for the door. He pretended not to notice her slightly hurt expression as he disappeared with a brief, sorry. It was hard to determine which mistakes he was apologizing for. Dash 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 dot. Okay. So he'd been hit with Cupid's arrow and he was now under the influence of the love-based quirk, which had manifested feelings of attraction and intense affection towards his closest friend. He had no idea how to eliminate the effects, he was reluctant to tell anyone about them, and he was hurting his friend the more he tried to stay away from her. How was he supposed to learn to cope with this? Maybe, at a certain point, it would just become another aspect of his life. Wake up, brush teeth, do morning exercises, eat breakfast, read hero news, daydream about Uraraka. Go to class, take notes, doodle Uraraka. Do hero work, take a soothing bath, settle into bed, fall asleep thinking of Uraraka. He could fit that into his schedule, right? Maybe if he managed his time well enough, it wouldn't take more than a few minutes each day, and if he could just compartmentalize his romantic feelings for her, separate them from his very important actual friendship with her, he could carry on as if nothing had changed. But by the fifth time over the next 3 days Uraraka started towards him or began to say something to him and Izuku panicked and ran away, shame and regret and longing swirling in his gut. He had to admit that things had, indeed, changed. dash 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 dot. Thursday the 9th of June, 1533. Deku, are you mad at me? 1541. Whatever I did, I am sorry. 1602. Was it when I ate your stuff out of the fridge? I thought it was fair game since it was in the common area. Friday the 10th of June, 10:08. The circles under your eyes keep getting darker, even though you were trying to look happy at All Might's birthday party. I am worried about you. Saturday the 11th of June, 1900. Please talk to me. I am here if you need me. I've got a question for you. Midoriya-chan, said Asui, resting her arms across the top of the couch Izuku was sitting on. Izuku glanced back at her curiously. Asui, no, Suyu-chan, she wanted to be called Suyu-chan, was usually a sharp student and rarely had trouble with their material, but if there was any way he could help, he was glad to do so. What are you stuck on? He prompted, turning a page in the textbook open on the table in front of him. Ochako-chan, she said. Izuku's finger slipped, and the paper sliced against his skin. He hissed in a breath, clutching the paper cut. That's not something I'm an expert in, he replied, checking to see how bad the bleeding was. It welled up in a wet crescent in seconds, so Izuku went back to squeezing it, not wanting to bleed all over the table. Oh, I think most of us would say otherwise. Suyu-chan's voice was steady, unflappable and calm as always as she rounded the couch and pulled a bandage from her pocket. Did she just walk around with those? Actually, knowing her, she probably did. After all, you're closer to her than any of us, even me. I doubt that, he waffled, obligingly holding out his hand after she'd unwrapped the bandage. And anyway, didn't you say you had a question for me? I haven't heard one yet. He was being a bit pedantic, but this really wasn't something he wanted to talk about. All right, she said, carefully wrapping the band-aid around the base of Izuku's ring finger and securing it. Why are you avoiding her? I'm not avoiding her, he lied. I've just. His eyes slid over to the side evasively. Been busy, she hummed, but Izuku wasn't sure whether it was a hum of acknowledgement or a hum of doubt. And yet you made time to throw garbage around with Iida-chan. We were cleaning up the green, he protested. It was part of our duties to take care of the campus. True. They'd kind of made a game out of it by kicking the garbage into trash cans with their quirts, but Izuku thought of it more like doing two tasks at once, community service and quirk practice, rather than goofing off. Why not invite her too? She wanted to join you. Having let Izuku's hand go, she sat down on the couch across from him, on the other side of the table. Her large eyes were staring holes into him. Did she? Izuku avoided her gaze. Of course Uraraka had wanted to help. He'd seen her lingering awkwardly by the door, waiting to be called over. His heart had shriveled in his chest as he pretended not to notice. Suyu-chan said nothing. Izuku frowned. If she really wanted to participate, she could have just joined us without asking. You know I'm not just talking about that one instance. Fists clenching in the fabric over his knees, Izuku's frown deepened. It wasn't worth trying to defend himself here. He was just making himself look like a jerk. He sighed, letting his hands unclench. Look, I'm not trying to avoid her. I'm having trouble, he decided, picking up his pencil and spinning it through his fingers. Being around her. Why, how on earth could he phrase this? I think I got brainwashed by a villain into falling in love with her. Something happened last week, when we were on a job together. And, it's messing with my head. The job with Aphrodite, Suyu-chan pressed, bringing a finger to her chin, and somehow Izuku wasn't surprised she even knew the villainess's name. He nodded, the pencil speeding up its spinning as his agitation built. I thought it went off without a hitch. I thought we managed to get through it without any damage at all, well, except to those buildings. And those fire hydrants. The pencil dropped out of his grip into the ground, but Izuku made no move to pick it up, his eyes falling to his textbook, staring right through it. I think I got hit. With her quirk, Cupid's arrow. He bent to retrieve the pencil, if only to have an excuse to hide the sudden flush in his cheeks. Why yeah, and you think, because you saw Ochako-chan after getting hit by this quirk, that you're... It's not real. He cut her off, rising up after spending way longer than he needed to picking up his writing implement and banging his head on the sharp edge of table in his haste, letting out a curse under his breath. Whatever's going through my head right now when I see her, he said through clenched teeth, rubbing the sore spot on his head, it's not real. And, that's kind of gross, right? He didn't wait for a response before going on. I mean, one day we're totally normal friends. You two have never been normal. And the next I'm a blushing stammering mess. To be fair, that doesn't sound much different to your default state. The heat in his voice ebbed away, and his shoulders slumped. It's not real, he repeated, his stomach sinking. Even if it's not, said Suyu-chan, you know what is real. The friendship that you two share. Izuku looked up at her, his brows knitting. She needs you, but you're not here anymore. You're letting this friendship die. It's only been like a week. Suyu-chan stared, blinked slowly. Izuku shrank back into the couch a little, chagrined. All right, maybe you're right. Running a hand through his hair, he sighed. But what am I supposed to do? Haven't I already messed it up beyond all reason? I can't just go back to normal. Ochako-chan would never abandon you, no matter what you're feeling, she pointed out. You should just tell her exactly what happened. She'll be grossed out, he said weakly, tapping his fingertips together in his lap. Suyu-chan fixed him with another silent stare. All right, all right. He crossed his arms. So she's not mean enough to get grossed out by that, I guess. But she'll still feel awkward. You'll work it out, Suyu-chan assured him with a smile. There's no wound between you that can't be healed. Standing up, she pulled another band-aid out of her pocket and left it on the table. What, is this for the metaphorical wound in our friendship? He questioned, holding up the bandage. No, said Suyu-chan, looking at him over her shoulder as she made her way to the lounge's exit. It's for the one on your head. The one on my... Perplexed, Izuku pressed the heel of his hand to the sore spot on his forehead, wincing. A small smear of blood greeted his eyes when he pulled his hand away. Damn it, he ground out, unwrapping the bandage. It had little hearts with arrows through them all over it. Izuku resolved to replace this bandage with another one when he got back to his room. Dash 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 dot. Monday the 13th of June, 7:12. Uraraka-san, I'm sorry. I've had a lot on my mind this past week, but I never intended to shut you out. Meet me after school outside. We'll walk to the dorm together, and I'll tell you everything. 15 minutes went by, which might as well have been an eternity. 7:28, okay. Asterisk. Hollow down pointing triangle. Asterisk, the reply finally arrived. Izuku let out the breath he'd been holding since he saw the ellipsis indicating her typing, feeling relieved already. dash 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 dot. The sky was dreary again, and it wasn't helping Izuku's nervousness as Uraraka glanced at him out of the corner of her eye as she met him on the steps after school. Hey, she said, testing the waters. I'm sorry, he blurted, and then shook his head, and no, I mean, hi. She burst out laughing, and the clouds in his chest cleared away just a little, a smile sneaking across his face. Starting right in with that, huh? I like it. She elbowed him playfully as they started off their walk. You better be sorry, mister. I thought you wanted to get rid of me. I would never want that. He spluttered, alarmed. She smiled sweetly, her eyes crinkling at the corners again. I know, she said, affection clear in her tone. You like me way too much. Izuku stopped in his tracks, gulping in a deep breath. Uraraka turned when she realized Izuku was no longer beside her, her brows knitting in concern. Deku, Uraraka, he choked out, the thing is, you're right. She just blinked at him. Huh, last week, he started, pulling at a loose thread on the bottom of his uniform jacket nervously, when we fought Aphrodite. I thought we made it through without a hitch. I dunno. Those fire hydrants were actually kind of a big deal, she said, grimacing. He shook his head. Forget the fire hydrants. I'm trying to. Uraraka, he said insistently, taking a few steps towards her and meeting her eyes resolutely. I think I got hit with that quirk. She stared. You mean Cupid's arrow? He nodded, and ducked his head, feeling he'd crawl across his skin. When the arrow grazed me, there was a second where I was suspended in midair. I was upside down. It seemed like time had stopped. He swallowed, and shuffled his feet. At that moment, he lifted his head and looked at her, though he couldn't hold her gaze longer than a second. I saw you. A long silence stretched between them. A sudden cold sensation dropped onto his head, and he looked up to see rain beginning to drip from the gloom above. You think you fell in? She didn't seem to be able to say it, so he just nodded. The droplets of rain, slow and hesitant at first, were beginning to speed up, pelting onto their shoulders, their hair, the vibrant hydrangea bushes lining the street, the fists clenched at Izuku's sides. But it barely touched you, she reasoned, frowning. You seemed fine back then. Maybe it took a while to kick in, since it was just a tiny scratch. He shrugged. A large raindrop smacked him right between the eyes, as if scolding him for every stupid thing he was saying. And what? Her voice was hushed amid the growing plip and clatter of the rain, falling in earnest now. Uraraka looked down at her shoes. What makes you think it took effect later? He sighed, his hair starting to flatten against his forehead in wet streaks. He motioned for her to walk beside him again, since having this conversation motionless in the rain probably wasn't optimal. That night, he was actually somewhat grateful for the thunder that rumbled at that moment, since it obscured his voice a little. I had a dream. About you. You dreamed about me. She repeated, her voice an octave higher than usual. He turned his face to the side so she couldn't see how scarlet he was turning. And the next day, he went on, opting to skip the confirmation. I couldn't stop looking at you. Everything else kind of fell away. Like you were the only thing that was in focus in a photograph. I mean, you were sort of glowing. Her footsteps temporarily stopped beside him, and when he looked back at her, he saw that she was now the color of a baboon's ass, too. Oh, she said, her hair starting to cling to her neck. Um. What else? She pressed as she splashed over to catch up to him again. Izuku grimaced. I don't know. It was a lot of stuff, he mumbled, mortified. Blushing around you. Getting tongue-tied. But you're like that all the time, she pointed out. Why does everyone say that? He whined. Is that why you drew me in your notebook? She sounded a little sly now as she leaned in curiously. His face felt so hot that any moment he'd be invisible in a cloud of condensation. Maybe he could use it as a smokescreen to disappear, like a ninja. Yeah, he answered anyway. I'd try to focus on class, but my thoughts kept leading back to you. And not that I don't think about you usually, he hastened to add, looking up at her and flailing his hands a little. I mean, you're my best friend. But this was a little different. The thoughts I was having were. He cleared his throat. Different. Her hair was totally plastered to her head now, and it made her wide eyes look even bigger. Deku, was all she said, soft and amazed. The look on her face was unreadable. Izuku couldn't tell if she was horrified, gobsmacked, or just very cold. He was certainly cold, since the rain was starting to trickle down the back of his neck under his uniform. So. I felt terrible about it, he continued, moving forward so he had an excuse to look ahead instead of at her. Why? Well, because, though he'd just decided not to look at her, he couldn't help sparing her a glance at that. I mean, we make it through that battle unscathed, but then the next day it turns out I got hit with a love arrow, and I'm suddenly thinking of you like that after you thought I was totally fine. Out of nowhere, I thought I'd freak you out. Her lips pursed over to one side contemplatively. Why would that freak me out? We're friends, he exclaimed, getting a bit frustrated now. Friends don't want to hold hands, or touch. Someone might want to tell that to Mina, Uraraka interrupted. She's really clingy. He shot her an exasperated look, and she smiled sheepishly. Sorry. Just, trying to add some levity here. She tucked a strand of drenched hair behind her ear, but there was still a tendril of it stuck to her cheek. Before he could stop himself, he'd reached out and brushed it away for her, his hand freezing as soon as her eyes shot up to meet his. For a moment, neither of them moved, his thumb gently touching her cheekbone the same way she touched his after their mission. Sorry. He broke the spell, pulling his hand away like he was touching lava instead of rainwater. See what I mean? I keep wanting to do things like that. So, just to summarize, Uraraka said, tucking her hands into her pockets as they kept walking, and why hadn't either of them brought an umbrella? It had been raining all week. You got a teeny tiny scratch during that battle, which did not come from the arrowhead. The next day, you started thinking of me differently after having a dream about. She glanced at him as if asking for elaboration. You, he eked out, unwilling to say any more than that. Me, she repeated, a little disappointed but pressing on nevertheless. And you think this means you're under the influence of a love quirk? Yes, he nodded. So I guess we have to talk to someone about getting it reversed, Uraraka. He fell silent when he noticed her stop, her posture stiffening as she turned away from him. Was it just hitting her now? How unnatural his feelings were. Uraraka. Her shoulders began to quiver, and he reached out his hand as if to touch her, only to stop short. She wouldn't want him to touch her now, would she? Deku. There was something choked in her voice. Panic rose in his belly. Was she going to cry? What would he do? He couldn't dry her tears if it was raining. You're so stupid. A sound escaped her, quiet and restrained. He slumped. I know. I'm sorry I hid this from you. She made that sound again. I can't believe you. I thought something was seriously wrong. I didn't mean to ignore you, he insisted, finally gathering the courage to lay a hand on her shoulder, turning her towards him. Please, I'll fix it, so don't cry. Unable to hold back any more, Uraraka let it all out. She bent double and laughed, loud and uncontrollable, hands braced on her knees. Deku. You, big dummy, she wheezed in between peals of laughter. Well, this was certainly not how he was expecting to get his heart broken. I'm sorry. I won't bother you with this again, he mumbled, the pieces of his heart dropping into his stomach like shards of glass. Wait, Deku, listen, she urged him, her hand darting out and wrapping around his before he could run off. There is no way you got hit with that quirk. The rain poured down around and on them, thunder occasionally breaking through the sound of it as he stared at her blankly. What? First of all, I was not the first thing you saw after it grazed you, she started, her fingers tightening. Izuku's hand curled around hers and clasped it back without thought. You definitely would have seen the street sign directly behind Aphrodite first. Oh. There was a street sign, he recalled. Second, she went on, her fingers now sliding between his, her slick palm pressing against his, the quirk is instantaneous. You would have been spouting love sonnets to that street sign in seconds. I think it might take a little longer than that to write a sonnet, he replied weakly. And lastly, her thumb, he realized, was stroking over the back of his hand, gently brushing his knuckles. The quirk only lasts like an hour. His vision tunneled as he stared right into her face. A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the sky above her like a spotlight, and he was mesmerized by the equally stunning light dancing in her eyes. If, if I didn't get hit by the quirk, he breathed, why am I? Why have I? Uraraka smiled his favorite smile, and pushed some of his hair out of his eyes. It sounds like you just like me, you silly boy. Oh, he said, the tiny word disappearing amid the downpour of rain. Oh, no, but he felt like the world was shifting around him. Up was sideways. The ground under his feet was actually clouds. He felt dizzy. He felt grounded. He felt sick. He felt elated. He felt. Oh, he said once more. You're thinking really hard, aren't you? She teased. Yes, he admitted, and took her face in his hands. But I'll stop now. Kissing Uraraka felt simultaneously like a thunderstorm raging inside him and like the blissful calm of a cloudless, sunny afternoon. He had no idea what he was doing, and he was pretty sure first kisses weren't supposed to be this wet, because they were standing in the rain, but it was still the best thing he'd ever done. She pulled him closer when he began to draw back, not ready to let go just yet, and his hands moved to cradle the back of her head, obliging her and letting himself live out his own dream. Although his dream had been considerably drier. I've always loved you, she breathed against him when they parted, reaching up on her toes to press her forehead to his. From the first time you risked yourself to save me, I knew I'd always be willing to do the same for you. He couldn't tell if the wetness on his face was tears or just more rain, but she brushed it away from the corners of his eyes anyway. Thank you, he choked out. I never thought you, or anyone, would ever, and to think, I've actually felt this way for so long, but I just didn't. Yeah, you took a while, she laughed, and wrapped her arms around him, nuzzling her cheek against his collarbone. But it's all right. You're here now. Yes, he said, hugging her back. I am. He felt a chill race down his spine, and relished in the feeling. Was this what it was like to love and be loved? He almost felt like his hair could stand on end. At that moment, A giant bolt of lightning pierced the sidewalk 3 yards away from them, and the new couple screamed and clutched onto one another for dear life as thunder split the sky and cracked above their heads. We should get out of the rain, she squeaked. Yeah, yup. So, she started as she set the mug of hot cocoa down on the table. You never told me what exactly you dreamed about. Thank you, he said, and held the mug between his hands, blowing the steam off it. They'd separated when they reached the dorm to take warm showers, and now they were in dry clothes again, their hair still damp as they sat together in the common room. And no, Izuku continued. I didn't. She sat down across from him, resting her cheek in her hand and raising an eyebrow at him. And you're not going to, are you? He blew on his cocoa again, and risked a tiny sip. Still too hot. Probably not. Mean, she grumbled, glaring at him before dropping her eyes down to the book she'd pulled onto her lap. But to be honest, it started right here, he said offhand. She put down the book before she'd even read a sentence. Really, leaning over the table towards him, she fixed eager eyes on him. What happened? I was studying. Just like this, he said. Of course you were dreaming about studying, she snorted, rounding to the other side of the table so she could sit next to him instead of across from him. You sat next to me, just like that, Izuku continued. Her eyes widened. Really? And after that, he faltered, the contented smile on his face falling away and being replaced by an uncertain frown. His face heated. Maybe the cocoa was warming him up a little too fast. He hid the lower half of his face behind his mug and took a long sip. I can't remember, he lied at last. She groaned exasperatedly, leaning against his shoulder and cuddling into him. Izuku felt his whole body explode with heat. If you think this is the last time we're having this conversation, think again. He surprised her by wrapping an arm around her to pull her closer to him. I thought I was supposed to stop thinking for now. She agreed, nuzzling into his shoulder as her eyelids began to droop. I guess so. You seem cozy, he noted. It would be a shame if my legs fell asleep and I had to get up. Don't even think about it, she mumbled sleepily. He smiled, and decided to take the advice. Where stories live. Discover now.